The sound of splintering glass and drunken laughter shattered the stillness of the Dakota Territory night as Nora Nelson clutched her small carpet bag to her chest, her knuckles white with fear. She had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, only to discover her intended husband had traded her arrival papers for 3 bottles of whiskey just hours before her stagecoach rolled into White Pine. It was 1876, and the promise of a new life on the frontier had turned into a nightmare for the 20-year-old schoolteacher before she'd even had a chance to shake the dust of travel from her skirts. "Sold you fair and square," slurred the saloon keeper, a portly man with tobacco-stained whiskers named Harlan Pike. "Papers say whoever holds M gets the bride. That's frontier law." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "Sir, I am not a piece of property to be bartered. I came here in good faith to marry Mr. Pearson, who corresponded with me for 6 months." "Well, Mr. Pearson preferred whiskey to a wife," Pike laughed, wiping beer foam from his mustache. "And now you belong to Jeb Turner. Paid good money for you too, so you'd best be grateful." The man Pike referred to Turner sat slumped at a corner table, already deep in his cups despite the early evening hour. His weathered face was hidden beneath a matted beard, and his clothes reeked of livestock and sweat, even from where Nora stood. "I will not be traded like cattle," Nora said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I demand to speak with the sheriff." "Sheriff's out of town till next week, missy. Now you can go with Jeb peaceful-like, or we can make things difficult." Nora glanced toward the door, calculating her chances of escape, but White Pine was unfamiliar territory surrounded by miles of wilderness. With night falling and nowhere to go, her options were painfully limited. A voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Pike." All heads turned toward the figure standing in the doorway. Zachary Kincaid removed his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes that held a quiet intensity. His tall frame filled the entrance, one hand resting casually near the pistol on his hip. "This doesn't concern you, Kincaid," Pike spat. "Turner's got legal claim to the male bride." "There's nothing legal about trading a human being for whiskey," Zachary replied, his voice low but carrying easily through the now silent saloon. Jeb Turner staggered to his feet, knocking over his chair. "I paid fair price," he slurred. "She's mine now." Zachary's gaze shifted to Nora, taking in her trembling form and the fear etched across her face. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or simply conscience awakening after a long slumber. "How much?" Zachary asked, turning back to Pike. "What?" "How much for the papers?" Pike's eyes narrowed. "Turner paid 3 bottles of my best whiskey." "I'll give you 6, Zachary said, reaching into his pocket and tossing several gold coins onto the bar. "That should cover it." "Now wait just a minute," Turner began, but Zachary cut him off. "You're too drunk to remember your own name, let alone take responsibility for a lady. Go sleep it off, Jeb." Turner looked ready to argue but seemed to think better of it when he met Zachary's steady gaze. With a muttered curse, he slumped back into his chair. Pike scooped up the coins, counting them twice before reaching beneath the bar and producing a wrinkled envelope. "Fair's fair. She's yours now, Kincaid." Zachary took the papers without comment and turned to Nora. "Madam, I'm not claiming any rights over you. I'm just getting you out of here. If you'll allow me, I can take you somewhere safe for the night." Nora hesitated, weighing her limited options. The man before her was a stranger, but there was something in his eyes that suggested honesty. At the very least, he wasn't stumbling drunk. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted quietly. Zachary nodded once. "My sister runs a boarding house on the edge of town. You'll be safe there until you decide what you want to do." He offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Nora took it. The saloon had grown eerily quiet as Zachary escorted her out into the cool evening air. "I'm Zachary Kincaid," he said once they were outside. "Most folks call me Zach." "Nora Nelson," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the ordeal. "I appreciate your intervention, Mr. Kincaid, but I must make it clear that I have no intention of honoring whatever claim those papers might suggest." A faint smile touched his lips. "I wouldn't expect you to, Miss Nelson. I didn't buy those papers to claim you. I bought them to free you." The sincerity in his voice gave Nora pause. "Then why?" Zachary was silent for a moment as they walked through the dusty Main Street. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be treated as property. No one deserves that." As they made their way toward the edge of town, Nora couldn't help but study her rescuer. Zachary Kincaid walked with the easy confidence of a man comfortable with himself, yet there was a guardedness to him that suggested past wounds. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and though he carried a gun like most men in these parts, he didn't seem to share the rough demeanor of the men in the saloon. "You're not from White Pine originally, are you, Mr. Kincaid?" Nora asked, trying to fill the silence. "No, madam. Born in Missouri, but I've been moving west since the war ended. Settled here about 3 years ago." "You fought in the war?" "Yes." His tone made it clear he wouldn't elaborate further. They approached a 2-story clapboard house set slightly apart from the other buildings. Warm light glowed from the windows, and a hand-painted sign read, "Kincaid Boarding House." Before they reached the door, it swung open to reveal a woman with the same dark hair as Zachary, though her eyes held a warmth his did not. "Zach, who's this?" she asked, her gaze curious but kind as it settled on Nora. "Hannah, this is Miss Nora Nelson. She needs a place to stay tonight. Miss Nelson, my sister Hannah Kincaid." Hannah's expression softened. "Of course. Come in out of the evening chill, Miss Nelson." Nora followed Hannah inside, grateful for the warmth and the smell of fresh baked bread that permeated the cozy front room. "I'll leave you ladies to get acquainted," Zachary said, tipping his hat. "Miss Nelson, I'll stop by tomorrow to see if there's anything else you need." Before Nora could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. "Don't mind my brother," Hannah said, taking Nora's carpet bag. "He's always been a man of few words. Now let me show you to a room and then perhaps you join me for some tea. You look like you could use it." Nora followed Hannah up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a simple bed, dresser, and washstand. After setting down her bag, Hannah led her back downstairs to a kitchen where a kettle was already steaming on the stove. "Now," Hannah said as she poured 2 cups of tea, "would you like to tell me how you ended up with my brother at this hour?" Nora hesitated, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "It's rather humiliating." "We all have stories we'd rather not tell," Hannah said gently. "But sometimes sharing the burden makes it lighter." With a deep breath, Nora recounted her journey from Boston, the months of correspondence with a man named Edward Pearson, and the horrifying discovery that he had traded her away for whiskey. "Your brother intervened when the saloon keeper insisted I belonged to the man who held my papers," she finished, staring into her teacup. Hannah's expression had darkened as Nora spoke. "Edward Pearson," she said with disgust. "I should have known. He's been nothing but trouble since he came to White Pine, and Harlan Pike is cut from the same cloth." "Your brother bought the papers from him," Nora said quietly, "but he assured me he makes no claim on me." Hannah smiled. "That sounds like Zach. He may be rough around the edges, but he's a good man. The war left its mark on him, but it never took his decency." "What will I do now?" Nora asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since she stepped off the stage coach. "I spent nearly everything I had on the journey here." "You'll stay here until you figure things out," Hannah said firmly. "White Pine needs a schoolteacher, Our last one left 6 months ago to get married, and the children have been running wild ever since. If you're interested, I could speak to the town council." Hope flickered in Nora's chest. "I am a certified teacher. It's what I did in Boston." "Then it's settled. For tonight, rest. Tomorrow, we'll see about making White Pine your home if you want it to be." That night, in the small but comfortable bed, Nora lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town. The enormity of her situation pressed upon her alone, nearly penniless, 1,000 miles from everything familiar. Yet somehow, the kindness of the Kincaid siblings had given her a fragile sense of hope. Morning brought weak sunshine and the sounds of a town awakening. Nora dressed carefully in her second-best dress, grateful that Hannah had provided hot water for washing. When she made her way downstairs, she found the dining room occupied by several boarders' 2 elderly sisters, a young clerk from the mercantile, and a middle-aged man who introduced himself as the town's physician. "Miss Nelson is considering taking the position of schoolteacher," Hannah announced as she served breakfast. "About time," Dr. Reynolds said, buttering a biscuit. "My boy Tommy's forgotten half his arithmetic since Mrs. Wilson left." "The school building's sound enough," one of the elderly sisters added, "but it needs a woman's touch. All dusty and neglected these past months." Nora found herself warming to the idea. Teaching was what she knew, what she loved. Perhaps this unexpected detour could become a new beginning. After breakfast, Hannah suggested they visit the school building, a simple one-room structure at the far end of town. As they walked, Nora noticed Zachary Kincaid emerging from the livery stable, leading a chestnut mare. He spotted them and changed direction to intercept their path. "Morning, ladies," he said, hat in hand. "Miss Nelson, I trust you rested well." "I did, thank you," Nora replied, suddenly aware of how his presence made her pulse quicken. In the clear light of day, she could see that Zachary Kincaid was a handsome man, with features that might have been carved from granite and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "Hannah's showing me the schoolhouse," she continued. "She thinks I might be able to take over as teacher." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Town needs a school teacher. Children are running half wild." "So I've heard," Nora said with a small smile. "I was just telling Nora that the town council meets tonight," Hannah said. "I thought we might present her credentials then." Zachary nodded. "Mayor Wilson will be pleased. His twin girls are among the worst affected by the lack of schooling." They continued their walk to the school, Zachary falling into step beside them. The schoolhouse was indeed in need of attention. Dusty windows, desks in disarray, and chalk marks still on the board from lessons months ago. "It's not much," Zachary said, watching Nora's reaction. "It's perfect," Nora replied, already envisioning how she would arrange the space. "All it needs is some care." A small smile touched his lips. "If you decide to stay, I could help with repairs. The roof leaks in the northwest corner." "That's very kind, Mr. Kincaid." Their eyes met briefly, and Nora felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. Looking away quickly, she busied herself examining the bookshelf with its sparse collection of worn readers and arithmetic texts. "I should get back to work," Zachary said after a moment. "Hannah, will you bring Miss Nelson to the council meeting tonight?" "Of course," Hannah replied, giving her brother a look Nora couldn't quite interpret. After he left, Hannah helped Nora take inventory of the school's supplies. "My brother doesn't usually take such an interest in town matters," she remarked casually as they worked. "Oh." Nora tried to sound equally casual. "Zach keeps to himself mostly, runs his ranch just outside town, comes in for supplies once a week, for him to offer help with repairs. Well, it's not like him." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure he's just being neighborly." Hannah's smile suggested she thought otherwise, but she didn't press the point. That evening, Nora presented her credentials to the town council, 5 men who seemed genuinely relieved to have a qualified teacher willing to take on their children. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with an impressive mustache, offered her the position on the spot, along with use of the small cabin behind the schoolhouse. "It's modest," he warned, "but it's yours if you want it, part of the teacher's compensation." Nora accepted gratefully, aware of Zachary sitting quietly in the back of the room. He had said little during the meeting, but his presence had somehow given her confidence. As the meeting concluded, he approached. "I'll start on those repairs tomorrow if that's agreeable." "That would be wonderful, Mr. Kincaid. Thank you," he nodded, that same small smile touching his lips. "Zach," he corrected gently. "If you're staying in White Pine, you might as well call me Zach." "Zach," she repeated, liking the way his name felt. "And I'm Nora." For the next week, Nora divided her time between preparing the schoolhouse and making the small cabin habitable. True to his word, Zach appeared each morning to work on repairs, fixing the leaky roof, replacing broken window panes, and constructing new bookshelves from pine boards. They worked mostly in companionable silence, but gradually, Nora began to learn about the man behind the reserved exterior. He had fought for the Union, though he spoke little of those years. After the war, he had drifted west, eventually buying land outside White Pine to raise horses. His skill with animals was evident in the way he gently shooed away a nesting bird before repairing the eaves where it had made its home, carefully relocating the nest to a nearby tree. For his part, Zach seemed equally interested in Nora's story, her upbringing in Boston as the daughter of a minister, her decision to become a teacher, and her reasons for answering Edward Pearson's advertisement for a bride. "I wanted adventure," she admitted as they ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese one afternoon. "Boston felt stifling, and after my parents died of influenza 2 years ago, there was nothing keeping me there." "And now," Zach asked, his dark eyes studying her, "is this the adventure you wanted?" Nora considered the question. "Not the one I expected," she said honestly, "but perhaps the one I needed." The day before school was set to begin, Nora surveyed the transformed classroom with pride. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Clean windows allowed sunlight to stream across newly arranged desks, and bookshelves held the existing texts along with several new readers Zach had purchased from a bookseller in Deadwood. "It looks like a proper school now," she said, turning to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "You've worked wonders," he agreed. "We both have," she corrected, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I couldn't have done this without your help." Something shifted in his gaze. "Nora!" The door burst open, startling them both. Hannah stood there, looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's trouble in town. Edward Pearson's back, and he's looking for his property, his words, not mine." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "He can't possibly, he's drunk and making a scene at Pike's saloon," Hannah continued. "Says he was swindled, that Pike had no right to sell his mail-order bride." Zach's expression hardened. "Stay here," he told Nora. "Hannah, stay with her." "Zach, don't," Nora began, but he was already striding toward the door, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "He won't do anything foolish," Hannah assured her after he'd gone. "But he won't let Pearson threaten you either." The next hour was the longest of Nora's life as she and Hannah waited in the schoolhouse. When the door finally opened, Zach entered alone, his expression unreadable. "It's handled," he said simply. "Pearson won't be bothering you, did you?" Nora couldn't finish the question. Zach shook his head. "No violence, just truth. I showed him your papers, which I've been carrying to keep safe, and reminded him that he forfeited any claim when he traded them for whiskey. The sheriff's back in town now." He made it clear that harassing the town's new schoolteacher wouldn't be tolerated. Relief washed over Nora. "Thank you." Later that evening, as Nora settled into her cabin for the first night, a knock at the door revealed Zach standing on her porch, hat in hand and an uncertain expression on his face. "I wanted to make sure you were settled in all right," he said, remaining outside. "I am, thank you." Nora hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in for tea?" He seemed surprised by the invitation but nodded. "That would be nice." Inside, as Nora prepared the tea, Zach stood awkwardly by the small table. "I have something for you," he said finally, pulling a small package from his pocket. "A welcome gift, I suppose." Curious, Nora unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful fountain pen with a mother-of-pearl inlay. "Zach, it's lovely," she breathed, turning it over in her hands. "Thought you might need it for teaching," he said, a touch of color in his cheeks. "It's from back east. Had it ordered special." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Nora deeply. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." They sat drinking tea as the evening shadows lengthened, conversation flowing more easily than ever before. Zach spoke of his dreams for his horse ranch, and Nora shared her hopes for the school. In those quiet moments, something unspoken grew between them, a connection neither had anticipated. As Zach prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I was wondering if, that is, would you consider?" He stopped, seeming frustrated with his own hesitation. "Yes," Nora prompted gently. "Would you allow me to call on you properly? Not as a schoolteacher or a neighbor, but as a lady I'd like to court." The question, so formal and yet so heartfelt, made Nora smile. "I would like that very much, Zach." The smile that transformed his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Sunday then, after church, perhaps a picnic by the creek." Sunday would be perfect. After he left, Nora stood in the doorway watching his tall figure disappear into the night, marveling at how different her life had become in just a few short weeks. She had come to the Dakota Territory expecting to be a wife, only to find herself traded for whiskey. Now she was a schoolteacher with a classroom of her own and a man unlike any she had known waiting to court her. It wasn't the adventure she had planned, but as she closed the door and prepared for her first day of teaching, Nora Nelson knew it was exactly where she was meant to be. The following morning, Nora stood nervously at the front of the classroom as 27 children of varying ages filed in, eyeing her with curiosity. From 5-year-old Tommy Reynolds, clutching his slate with determination, to 16-year-old Mary Wilson, clearly skeptical of this new teacher from the East. They represented the future of White Pine. "Good morning," Nora began, her voice clear and confident despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'm Miss Nelson, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher." By midday, she had assessed the children's vastly different educational levels and begun the challenging task of creating appropriate lessons for each group. The younger children were eager to please, while the older ones particularly, the boys seemed determined to test her resolve. "Miss Nelson," called out 13-year-old Samuel Tucker, a mischievous glint in his eye, "is it true you came here to marry drunk Eddie Pearson and he traded you for whiskey?" The classroom fell silent as all eyes turned to Nora. She felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her composure. "In this classroom, Samuel, we address one another with respect. Drunk Eddie is not an appropriate way to refer to any adult, and my personal affairs are not a subject for classroom discussion." The boy looked chastened, but another voice piped up, Mary Wilson, the mayor's daughter. "Is it true, though? Everyone in town's talking about it." Nora took a deep breath, realizing that honesty might be her best approach. "Yes, I came to White Pine as a mail-order bride. The arrangement didn't work out, which turned out to be a blessing, as it allowed me to become your teacher instead. Now, Shall we return to our arithmetic? Her straightforward answer seemed to satisfy their curiosity, and the lesson resumed. When school dismissed for the day, Nora was exhausted but exhilarated. Teaching these frontier children would be challenging, but she already felt connected to them. As the last student left, Nora noticed Zach leaning against the doorframe, a quiet observer. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, gathering papers from her desk. "Long enough to see you handle Samuel Tucker better than anyone has yet managed," he replied with admiration. "That boy's father is the same way, full of questions that shouldn't be asked in polite company." Nora laughed. "Children are curious by nature. Sometimes the best approach is simple honesty." "Speaking of honesty," Zach said, stepping into the classroom, "I'm finding it hard to wait until Sunday to see you again." The directness of his statement made Nora's heart flutter. "Well, you don't have to wait right now. You're seeing me at this very moment." A slow smile spread across his face. "So I am. Might I walk you home, Miss Nelson?" "I'd like that, Mr. Kincaid." They strolled through town toward Nora's cabin, drawing curious glances from townspeople along the way. Word had spread quickly about the new schoolteacher's unusual arrival and Zachary Kincaid's involvement in her rescue. "People are talking," Nora observed quietly. "People always talk in small towns," Zach replied. "Does it bother you?" Nora considered the question. "Not as much as I thought it might. In Boston, such gossip would have been devastating. Here it feels different somehow. Frontier towns have different standards. People are judged more by what they do than by circumstances beyond their control." When they reached her cabin, Zach hesitated. "Would you like to join me and Hannah for supper tonight? She mentioned inviting you when I saw her earlier." "That would be lovely," Nora replied, surprised by how much she looked forward to spending more time with both Kincaids. Dinner at the boarding house was a lively affair, with Hannah's other boarders peppering Nora with questions about her first day of teaching. Zach said little, but Nora often caught him watching her, a warmth in his gaze that made her cheeks flush. After the meal, while Hannah and the others cleared the dishes, Zach invited Nora to see the garden behind the boarding house. "Hannah's pride and joy," he explained as they walked among neat rows of vegetables and herbs. "She's managed to grow things here that most folks said wouldn't take in Dakota soil." "She's remarkable," Nora said sincerely. "You both are. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't intervened that night." Zach's expression darkened. "I try not to think about that." "Why did you?" Nora asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Intervene, I mean. You didn't know me." He was silent for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "My mother was Cherokee. After my father died when I was 10, she had few rights despite being married to a white man. A local trader convinced the territorial authorities that she couldn't own property as an Indian woman. He took our farm for a fraction of its worth. Hannah and I were sent to different relatives. I didn't see my sister again until after the war." Nora's heart ached at his story. "I'm so sorry, Zach. When I saw you in that saloon being treated like property to be bartered, something in me couldn't stand by and watch. Not again." Without thinking, Nora reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Thank you for telling me." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "I've never told anyone that story except Hannah. I'm honored by your trust." In the fading light of evening, surrounded by Hannah's flourishing garden, something shifted between them, a deepening of the connection that had been growing since that first night. When Zach walked Nora back to her cabin later, their hands remained linked, a silent acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Nora taught during the day, gradually winning over even her most reluctant students. Evenings often found her in the company of the Kincaids, sometimes for dinner at the boarding house, other times working alongside Zach as he continued improvements to the school building. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild autumn sunshine. After church, where Nora endured more curious glances and whispered comments, Zach appeared at her side with a picnic basket. "Still interested in that creek?" he asked, a rare playfulness in his eyes. "Absolutely," Nora replied, taking his offered arm. The creek was a short ride from town, Nora sitting side saddle on a gentle mare Zach had brought specifically for her. They followed a winding path through golden cottonwoods until they reached a peaceful spot where the water widened into a small pool before continuing its journey. Zach spread a blanket beneath a broad tree and unpacked the basket Hannah had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a jar of fresh lemonade. As they ate, conversation flowed easily between them. Zach spoke more openly than ever before about his time during the war, the years of drifting afterward, and how he'd finally found peace in the Dakota Territory. "When I first came to White Pine, I kept to myself," he admitted. "Didn't see much point in getting involved with the town or its people." "What changed?" Nora asked. He looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. "You did." The simple honesty of his answer took her breath away. "Nora," he continued, setting aside his plate, "I know this is fast. You've only been in White Pine for a few weeks. But I find myself thinking about you constantly. When I'm at the ranch, I'm counting the hours until I can ride into town. When I'm in town, I'm looking for excuses to pass by the schoolhouse." Nora's heart raced. "I feel the same way," she confessed. "It frightens me a little how quickly my feelings for you have grown." "We could slow down," he offered, though his expression suggested it wasn't what he wanted. "No," Nora said, surprising herself with her certainty. "Life on the frontier teaches you not to waste time, doesn't it?" A smile broke across his face, the full, unguarded smile she had come to treasure for its rarity. "It surely does." When he leaned forward to kiss her, Nora met him halfway. His lips were gentle against hers, a question more than a demand. She answered by resting her hand against his cheek, drawing him closer. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. By day, she taught her growing class. Word had spread to outlying farms that White Pine had a proper teacher again, bringing more students. By evening, she often spent time with Zach, sometimes at the boarding house with Hannah, sometimes alone on rides through the countryside or walks along the creek where they'd shared their first kiss. As autumn deepened toward winter, their courtship became the subject of approving nods and smiles throughout White Pine. Even Harlan Pike tipped his hat respectfully when Nora passed his saloon, a silent acknowledgement that he had been wrong about her. Only Edward Pearson remained a dark cloud on her horizon. Though he had stopped openly harassing her after Zach's intervention, Nora occasionally felt his eyes following her when she walked through town. She mentioned her unease to Zach one evening as they sat on the porch of her cabin. "I'm probably being silly," she said, "but sometimes I feel as though he's watching me, waiting for something." Zach's jaw tightened. "You're not being silly. Pearson's a dangerous man when he's been drinking. I've asked the sheriff to keep an eye on him, and I've been making sure someone's always nearby when you're walking through town." "Is that why Dr. Reynolds suddenly needs to check on patients whenever I'm heading home from school?" Nora asked, realization dawning. Zach had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "I may have arranged a few things." Rather than feeling annoyed at his protective measures, Nora felt a rush of warmth. "Thank you for looking out for me." "Always," he promised, kissing her gently. The first snow of winter came early that year, dusting White Pine in white overnight. School was in session despite the weather, with children arriving bundled in whatever warm clothing their families could provide. Nora noticed that several of the poorer children had inadequate coats and boots, and she made a mental note to speak with Hannah about organizing donations. As the last child left for the day, Nora began tidying the classroom, expecting Zach's usual appearance to walk her home. When he didn't arrive, she assumed he had been delayed by the weather and decided to head home alone rather than wait in the increasingly cold building. The walk to her cabin was only a quarter mile, but the snow had picked up, limiting visibility. Nora pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, regretting her decision not to wait. She was halfway home when she became aware of footsteps behind her. "Miss Nelson," called a slurred voice that made her blood run cold. "Fancy meeting you out here all alone." Edward Pearson emerged from the swirling snow, his face flushed with cold and alcohol. "Been waiting for a chance to talk to you without that Kincaid fellow hovering about." Nora straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. "Mr. Pearson, I have nothing to say to you. Please excuse me." She attempted to step around him, but he blocked her path. "Not so fast. You and me, we had an arrangement. I paid good money to bring you out here. And then you traded me for whiskey before I even arrived," Nora reminded him, anger overcoming her fear. "Any arrangement between us ended then." "That was a misunderstanding," Pearson insisted, moving closer. His breath reeked of cheap whiskey. "I was celebrating your arrival, got carried away. Pike took advantage. It doesn't matter now. I'm establishing a new life here as the schoolteacher. Please let me pass." Pearson's expression darkened. "You think you're too good for me now, holding out for that half-breed Kincaid instead." The racial slur against Zach ignited Nora's temper. "Mr. Kincaid is twice the man you'll ever be. Now stand aside, or I'll scream for the sheriff." "No one will hear you in this storm," Pearson growled, grabbing her arm. Before Nora could react, a dark shape loomed behind Pearson. Zach's voice cut through the howling wind like steel. "Take your hand off her." Pearson whirled, releasing Nora as he faced the taller man. "This ain't your business, Kincaid. This woman was promised to me." "The lady has made her choice clear," Zach said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Leave now while you still can." Perhaps it was the absolute certainty in Zach's voice, or perhaps it was the way his hand hovered near his gun, but something made Pearson reconsider his position. With a final glare at Nora, he stumbled away into the snowstorm. The moment he was gone, Zach was at Nora's side, his hands gentle as they examined her arm where Pearson had grabbed her. "Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine," she assured him, though she was trembling with reaction. "How did you find me?" "I was delayed at the ranch fence broke in the storm. When I got to the school and found it empty, I knew you must have started home. Then I saw Pearson's tracks following yours." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "I should have been there sooner." "You were there when I needed you," Nora said, leaning into his solid warmth. "That's what matters." Zach insisted on staying at Nora's cabin that night, sleeping in a chair by the door to ensure Pearson didn't return. The next morning, he reported the incident to Sheriff Miller, who promptly arrested Pearson for public drunkenness and threatening behavior. "He'll be on the next stage out of town," the sheriff assured them. "Mayor's making it clear he's not welcome in White Pine anymore." With Pearson gone, the last shadow over Nora's new life lifted. As winter settled in earnest over the Dakota Territory, the town prepared for Christmas. The schoolchildren were excited about the upcoming holiday pageant, and Nora threw herself into preparations, coordinating with parents and helping to create simple costumes. One evening in mid-December, Zach arrived at her cabin looking unusually nervous. "Got time for a ride?" he asked. "In this weather," Nora glanced out at the snow-covered landscape, illuminated by a nearly full moon. "I've got the sleigh," he said, "and plenty of blankets. There's something I want to show you." Curiosity piqued. Nora bundled up in her warmest clothes and allowed Zach to help her into the sleigh. They rode in comfortable silence, the only sounds the jingle of the harness and the soft shush of runners on snow. To Nora's surprise, they headed not toward town but in the direction of Zach's ranch, which she had yet to visit. After about 20 minutes, they crested a small rise, and a view opened before them that took Nora's breath away. In a small valley, illuminated by the moonlight on snow, stood a beautiful two-story farmhouse. Light glowed from the windows, smoke curled from the chimney, and a broad porch wrapped around the front. "Your ranch," Nora breathed. "It's lovely, Zach." "Our ranch," he said quietly. "If you want it to be." Nora turned to him, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" Zach reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I'm saying that I love you, Nora Nelson, that I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Nora's eyes, quickly turning to ice in the winter air. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Zach slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that warmed her despite the December chill. Later, as they sat before the fireplace in the ranch house, their future home, Zach explained that he had been working to complete renovations for weeks, wanting everything to be perfect before he proposed. "I've been alone for so long," he admitted, his fingers intertwined with hers. "Never thought I'd find someone who would understand me, accept my past, share my future." "I came west looking for a new life," Nora replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined finding love like this." They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in White Pine's small church. Hannah stood as Nora's witness, her face beaming with happiness for her brother and new sister-in-law. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the schoolchildren presenting their teacher with a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. As Zach and Nora exchanged vows, Nora couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as a desperate gamble answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride had led through humiliation and danger to this moment of perfect joy. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zach's kiss held a promise of all the years to come. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Zachary Kincaid, Nora knew that sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinies. Spring came early that year, bringing new life to the land and to the Kincaid ranch. Nora continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on the mare Zach had given her as a wedding gift. In the evenings, they worked side by side on the ranch, Nora creating a garden to rival Hannah's, Zach expanding his horse breeding operation. Their first child, a son they named James after Zach's father, was born the following winter. Hannah moved from the boarding house to the ranch to help with the baby, having sold the business to a respectable widow from Deadwood who wished to settle in a quieter town. As the years passed, White Pine grew and prospered. The school expanded to 2 rooms, with Nora training a young woman from back east to take over the younger children. 3 more children joined the Kincaid family: twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, and another son, Daniel. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Zach surprised Nora with a special gift: the original mail-order bride papers, now framed alongside the deed to their ranch. "To remind us," he said, "that sometimes the worst decisions can lead to the best outcomes." Nora looked around at their home, at the children playing in the yard, at the life they had built together, and knew that he was right. Being traded for whiskey had been the greatest blessing of her life, for it had led her to Zachary Kincaid, the man who had sobered up enough to find his conscience, and in doing so, had found his heart. "I wouldn't change a thing," she told him, reaching up to touch the face that had become as familiar to her as her own. "Not a single moment." "Nor would I," Zach agreed, gathering her close. "Every step led us here together, and that's worth everything." As the Dakota sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nora and Zach stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Their journey had begun with whiskey and desperation, but it had flourished into a love story that would be told in White Pine for generations to come, the tale of the mail-order bride who was traded for whiskey, and the cowboy who found both his conscience and his heart.